Hello everyone and welcome to my channel, Dreams of Atlantis. This is part 2 of the story about Tehut. So I hope you enjoy this one and I'll get on with the story. In part 1 we talked about how Tehut was Uran's best friend, and we went into the details of where Tehut came from and the setting up of the various universities. And then, of course, there was the downfall of Uran. And Uran left Tantal, and Tehut at that point in time was still in the location named after him, called Tehut. Anyway, he continued on good terms with both Uran and with Bela, who was the person who took over from Uran. And it was kind of tricky because it was Bela who had overthrown Uran, obviously. But Uran was his best friend, and yet Bela was also a good friend. He was in fact one of Uran's children, born in Kron, hence the name Bela of Kron. And Bela was essentially like a grandchild to Tehut, and he was loved very much because remember, Tehut was married to Bela's grandmother, so of course he was like a grandchild. So Tehut's wife was in fact Bela's grandmother. But I guess all this just complicates the story. So as I said, Tehut remained on good terms with Bela. Let's just say they had an understanding. So when resources were stretched due to overpopulation, Bela undertook to build a giant version of their energy generation technology in Chem. It was, in fact, what we know as the Great Pyramid, with the two supporting pyramids, each having a different purpose. Tehut was asked to be involved in its creation, and because he was so close to Bela, he did agree. He worked closely with other scientists from Tantal to create the structure that not only fulfilled the purpose of energy generation, but also had designed into it key mathematical formulae and measurements to communicate certain information to anyone who might later come along if, say, the civilization itself were to be destroyed. The structures were completed approximately 22,000 years before now, but they were damaged very badly in the deluge. The period of destruction in the deluge was over a span of time based on various destructive occurrences, with the final one being that of the deluge and the massive earthquake and tsunami, which destroyed Tantal completely and did damage much of Chem as well as other locations. And this occurred approximately 12,400 years ago. In the deluge, Tehut University was still mostly intact. It was nestled between mountains. The area to one side of the mountains was pretty much wiped out. Many died, but there were still plenty of survivors. Tehut was actually at his university when the most terrible part of the devastation struck. He made sure that his wife and as many of his people as possible were safe, but within that same day, to the utter surprise and astonishment of everyone, he said he had to leave. And he went to the Temple of Light to check on the Great One. Now, his family and everyone didn't realize where he was going at the time. They thought he was heading to Tantal, but he wasn't. He just immediately went to the Temple of Light. And I don't even think he'd returned there since leaving the place about 24,000 years earlier. But I could be wrong, but no one ever spoke of it. When he returned from the temple, He said that the Temple of Light stood as if nothing had happened, but it was the only thing still standing in the area. The devastation around it was massive, and yet it looked like normal, he said. When he reached the Great One, she acted as if it was all of no consequence, almost as if she expected it. I do not know much of what she said, but she was the one who advised Tehut to go to Chem with as many of his people as would go and help rebuild it. She said it would be there that the next civilization of greatness would be born. After the deluge, everything changed for everyone who survived. The feeling of loss was impossible to shake, but the sense of having to pull together for the future was even greater. So everyone who survived was expected to work towards getting humanity back on its feet. And that meant, by humanity, both the primitives and the original Tantals alike. Tehut and his wife then left his university, the one that was named after him, and with some students returned to Chem. In his time in Chem, he would make a lot of differences, and that really is quite a big story in its own right. But I will give you some of the critical highlights, but the whole story of Tehut in Chem would be at least another episode, maybe a few. But needless to say, both he and his wife made a great contribution to getting civilization restarted. The Tantal people in Chem, led by Tehut, walked a very fine line when it came to helping the people who were the primitives of Chem at the time. And they didn't want to be giving the primitives the technology because usually primitives misused it and tended to kill each other or even try to kill the Tantals themselves. So it was a fine line they were walking between helping the people and staying alive, basically. I was mainly in Neath at this time, but I did spend a few years in various other locations, helping out where I could. But I always tended to return to Neath. Even after moving to Chem towards the end of my life, I always expected that I would return to Neath. I worked alongside Tehut on many occasions, both in Chem and in other places, and it was he who devised a program to help set up written language around the world. I helped him with that on many occasions, but I did have other things on my plate, which were organized by my brother, who by this time never seemed to come out of hiding. I had to always go to him, let's say. As for Tehut, he taught, he wrote many books, he advised the other locations, and he guided the primitives to act in a civilized manner, well, as best he could. And that, of course, was a bit of a constant uphill battle for him. But the thing he was most passionate about was helping the primitives who were living in Chem at the time, who later became the dynastic Egyptians, to actually help them repair and repurpose the pyramids of Giza. He wanted the repair to continue to include all the special mathematics, etc., as well as extra things that he added from his original version. Then everything changed for him when his wife, my beautiful grandmother, was killed in an accident on the Nile. Tehut withdrew into himself, but he continued writing, and he wrote many books. And when he'd achieved all that he'd set out to do, he simply chose to stop taking the cure, and then he died of old age. It could almost be described as a form of suicide. He just wanted to go to his love. it was very, very painful for him being apart from her. There was actually a belief quite strongly held by the Tantals that we would go to another plane to wait until we reincarnate. And the greatest fear of any Tantal person was to return as a primitive. It's not so bad though. I mean, I did it. Anyway, I deviate. He believed that he would return in another life and find his wife and continue to help humanity. He died about 2,000 years before me, and I can't help wonder if he came back. And if so, did he remember the past like I can remember it? But anyway, before I finish this episode, there are a few more things that I need to clarify. Firstly, the Great One. Both the Great One and Uran had a belief that it was necessary to have a state of being detached from the activities of the primitive people. Not to say that they didn't help. They did, but they didn't interfere. I know there might be a fine line between those two. Japay, on the other hand, who was the leader who came after Belar, I suspect his middle name, in fact, was Interfere. But I won't venture into much of that topic at this time. Needless to say, Japay did interfere. He interfered a lot. But as far as I know, Uran never met the Great One. Uran learnt that philosophy from Tehut. And yet, Tehut did not live by that philosophy completely. He was fundamental in the establishment of several cultures. So in my opinion, this was not completely consistent with Uran and the Great One's policy of non-interference. But it is interesting that the Great One suggested that Tehut go to Chem and help restart civilization. I don't know anything about the decisions that are behind the scenes on that, but it does seem inconsistent. Anyway, in terms of some of the things that he did, he would take a team of the younger philosophers to help a new primitive group form their own written language, and they'd base it on what little language they had already. I think he had about 10 teams that he trained up, and he would split his time between them. And while he was also the leader of both Chem and the location called Tehut, he still managed to keep quite a strong hold on what these 10 teams that he trained up were doing. 4 of these team leaders came from a place called Anas, and the rest were Tantals. They were either from Tantal, the city, or from one of the other Tantal locations. This is interesting because I have absolutely no idea where Anas is, and I have no regressions regarding this place at all. I don't know the relationship between it and Tantal. Seriously, it's just a name to me. Anyway, most languages, as I said, were based on the way that the primitives in that area already communicated. But once they had a written language, it was found that their development towards civilization rapidly improved. In Chem, as with the other locations, they created a language with the primitives, who used words that they already had and developed any further syntax together and created that written language that was easy for them to understand and adapt to. Often it would be a picture that would represent a word, and then the language could develop from there. The people of Tantal who were helping often took names that were easy for the primitives of the area to say or remember, like the name of an animal or something relevant to describe them. Tehut, for example, had a largish nose, and so he took the name of the ibis, or should I say that the ibis took his name. Some of the Tantals chose how they might be known by the people they helped, and others just went with whatever the people thought of them. Some chose their favourite character from a game. That game was the game of herds. I think I've mentioned it once before. People were very keen on this game. They both followed the game and they played it. And there were even some people who played it essentially as an occupation. So it was often something they chose for themselves. This happened not only in Egypt or Chem, but everywhere that the Tantals went to help set up humanity. The way they assisted with the development of a written language in each culture is probably worth an episode in its own right. If it is of interest to anyone, please let me know, and I can do an episode on that. Actually, there is so much more that I could tell you about Tehut, and I guess some other episodes could be very interesting to people. For example, the philosophical teachings of Tehut, or where I think Tehut University might be located. I have a theory that it's in Bolivia, and this would be a place for me to start looking, but I could do this on another channel which I've set up, which is more about finding evidence from the real world. And I've actually called it URAN, Unbelievably Regressive Archaeological Navigations. I know that's a long name for a channel, but I wanted it to be called URAN, so I eventually worked out a way of the first letters spelling URAN, but it is actually a good name for the channel. And it's all about me finding proof for my dream regressions, which I'm working on a lot. And I think that the University of Tehut would be a very interesting topic for where I think it is. And another topic would be the Tehut's time that he spent in Egypt in more detail. And also, as I mentioned, language, both the language of the Tantals and the development of written language for primitives after the deluge, because I think that would make quite an interesting episode. But I need feedback to know what people are interested in. So just let me know if there's things that really, really interest you, and I'll put it on my list of episodes to do. As you can guess, there is just so much more I could tell you, but I will leave it at this point and invite you to ask me as many questions as you like. Just put a question in the comments and I will do my best to answer them. And of course, if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and click on the bell icon so you can be kept informed when a new episode is out. It is a bit of a struggle trying to build this channel, and I really need a bit of help with it. So a click and that would really help me a lot. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I will catch you all next time. Thanks. Bye.